61-2, clear takeoff, left hand. Takeoff left, it is 1. Left land, swim west, copy. Crossing 24. Crossing at 24 is
Hello and welcome to the Blueskies podcast. I'm PR Ganapathy, your host.
Just 70, roger, report type southeast, connection, for the midway, and field selected.
Well, folks, like all good things that need to come to an end, we're now at part 4 of our interview with Air Chief Marshal SP Tyagi. We're going to speak today about the Jaguar in Indian Air Force service and also about one incident linked to the first episode of season 2. I'm going to keep that surprise for you all, so stay tuned. Welcome back, sir, and thank you again so much for speaking to the audience of the Blue Skies.
Okay, thank you, Gans, and a very good morning to you. I'll take off from where we left last time, and that was when we were discussing the ferries. I would like to say that the ferries have been done earlier. The hunters, the vampires, the Canberras have been ferried before, and of course the transport crew keeps ferrying all over. But I have to say that the MiG-21s, ever since we started buying the Russian machines, they were all brought here and sort of assembled in India and provided to us in India. In fact, the test flights were done by the Russian test pilot, and in Nasik or such like places, we were handed over the aeroplanes, and that's how it was for the entire Russian fleet. But the Jaguars, after a long time, that means a break of nearly a decade and a half or more, uh, were required to ferry the aircraft from UK to India. Uh, I would like to believe that it was it was an extraordinary experience. One is the kind of weather that you fly in. So we used to fly in total clouding with, we in close formation to cross. But those are clouds which are, shall we call them, European clouds. They are not like the cumulus clouds that you encounter in India. So it wasn't so challenging. But we used to do a ILS approach down, and or was it PAR? I forget now. Um, uh, and I think we gained an enormous amount of landing at different air forces, learning different accents of the ATC officers, different languages. May I also say that the ferries were also used to bring small amounts of goodies like, the odd bottle of scotch, and which was in those days difficult to find or difficult to afford in
Right,
India.
right.
So more than one reason, the ferries were very important. I have to also say that the ground crew and the support crew, the AN-12 is to accompany the Jaguar boys. They used to perform a remarkable task. We used to land at a base, and we would take off, for example, from a particular base, and the ground crew could only take off from that base after the Jaguars had gone, and therefore they were always few hours behind us in landing at the new base. uh, we didn't wait for them that long next to the aircraft. We would clear the immigration and carry on. But we was to leave a note behind as to just refuel this aircraft, or if there is a snag, please look at this for the ground crew, and we'll tape it to the aircraft, and they would come and rectify the aircraft. It was just brilliant how they used to do it based on that. And of course, we would then meet up in the hotel 3 hours, 4 hours later. Uh, I would say that the contribution of the ground crew as well as the N12 crew was quite remarkable. Few things about the ferries. Some of the ferries were done via Dubai, and some of them were also done via Muscat. And I do recall that once. That is right. That is right. That is so. It was easier to operate. Like we used to go to Larnaca in Cyprus. That's because there was a Royal Air Force support. They had liquid oxygen, etc., available for the Jaguars. Um,
Right.
and we landed at Muscat, and some of the ferries just refueled, rearmed, and carried on. When I say rearmed, it was not armament. It was just turn around and charging of liquid oxygen, etc. But on some occasions, the Omani Air Force, uh, which was the Omani Jaguar squadron at that time, was manned totally by the Brits. There was, I think, only one Omani pilot in that squadron, and the entire lot was former RAF boys who had been seconded or who had left the RAF. They were a rough lot, that I don't think anybody flew above 100 feet, when in an emergency, we used to joke that they used to fly at 100 feet, and they said in emergency gain height, then that meant you climb to 200 feet if there is an emergency on board. They were a bunch of,
Uh,
those magnificent men and their flying machines. And I recall that once they said, "You can't go. Why land at Muscat? You land at our base, Jaguar base. We'll turn you around." And when the Indian Air Force took 4 Jaguars there, uh, there were some Jaguars of the Omani Air Force who were airborne, who gave us a kind of a they escorted us onto the base, and once we landed uh, a- at their base, they did what is euphemistically described as a beat up, but it was a little more than a beat up. We were scared to open our canopies because they were flying so low over us. We used to joke that if we wore a P cap, they would knock the P cap off. It was just another world, actually. Unbelievable, unbelievable. There were stories that we heard on the Omani basis that a new RAF guy arrived at the station commander and asked, "Where are your station flying orders?" So everybody laughed. They had never heard of anything like that. Uh, so he apparently issued the first flying orders. He said, I have to make the flying a little more disciplined here. And the first order was issued in which it said, nobody will fly supersonic close to the water tank. And next day, order number 2 was issued. It says, in view of the fact that the water tank is damaged, order number 1 is cancelled. So that is the kind of Air Force uh, we encountered. It became much more
right.
professional as the Omanization of the Air Force took place. But the ferries were very educative and great fun. And I have to say that they were followed by the Mirage squadrons, which ferried the aircraft from France. And by then, I think the IAF had gained a fair amount of experience on how to conduct the ferries in a professional manner. Hmm. Very, very, it just worked out very well. Uh, well, I'll switch on to the gunnery meets. I have to say that there were these misconceptions in the IAF that the Jaguar, because it has got a nav attack system, it can put a bomb in the bucket. Well, I'll tell you what, it helped, of course, but these systems, Marconi systems and all, were not that accurate, right? Um, the kit would throw a bomb anywhere. It wasn't the best of things, but there was this belief that. If we allow them to take part in bombing exercise, they'll win all the bombing competitions, because their kit will ensure that we get very high accuracy of weapons. So I remember that when I was commanding 14th Squadron, we were and you all were there at that time. We took 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 part in the gunnery meet, but we were allowed to take part only in the front guns and the gunnery part, and not in the bombing part, because somehow they believed. And I'll tell you what, Ganesh, after so many years, there is still a sense of relief, because to prove ourselves would have been very, very tricky in those gunnery meets. Uh,
The, ex- the expectations would have been very high, I'm sure.
and the knowledge of the aircraft was very little. Um, that is why these apprehensions. But happy to report that we took part only in the front guns, but we won it. And it had nothing to do with the kit. It's just a good bunch of guys in the squadron who shot straight.
Now, in terms of weapons, I know the aircraft had a lot of things that were first for the Air Force, like retarder bombs and laser guided bombs and things like that. Can you
Yes,
just speak
yes,
about
yes,
some of
yes.
those?
There was a learning curve for the entire Air Force, for us, but also for the rest of the Air Force. Because why I say the learning curve is that because of the head-up display, the moving map display, the nav attack system, the navigational aids on board, uh, the Jaguar could do fair amount of night strike. Well, it had a fair amount of night strike capability. You must understand that before the Jaguar arrived, was in 71, the MiG-21s did a wonderful job of carrying out low-level bombing attacks in the war. Uh, the fact is, the MiG-21 was not really designed for this. The compass was way below to monitor that aircraft. So only the TAC D aces could achieve what they did achieve. But you must also remember, in 71 we could get away with dive attacks and all that. Now, by the time the Jaguars arrived, the missiles had arrived. Crotals were in with the Pakistan Air Force, and therefore we had to do we couldn't afford to climb up for
Right.
weapon delivery.
Hmm.
And I believe the Jaguars brought in the first real night strike capability to the IAF. Um, but I did mention to you that the knowledge of the aircraft was kind of limited in the system, and I distinctly recall um, going to air headquarters as a representative of the squadron, and there was only one Jaguar squadron at that time, and make we were to make out a night flying syllabus. Now, so basic night flying, we just sort of copied, not copied is perhaps the wrong word, but we were impressed with the way RAF used to conduct their night flying training, and our suggestions were very similar to the ones that the RAF followed. But when I went to air headquarters, the Directorate of Offensive Operations, and I won't take any names, uh, they were the ones responsible for this. So I had put one dual check, and they don't follow moon phase, dark phase. They just do night flying is night flying for them. So I had made out the well. When I say we had made out that syllabus very much on those lines, and there was one dual check for night, one trainer sortie for night before a person was to be launched solo, because that's what the RF was following. Uh, in air headquarters, there was hangama, because there was a wing commander who was a Su-7 pilot, who said, "Sir, Sukhoi में तो हम दो करते हैं, ये कैसे एक करेंगे?" So they said, "Please do put two dual checks." So I said, "No, no, but we paid an enormous sum of money for this aircraft. so that it has a head-up display and it has a moving the map display, etc., etc., a nav attack system. Please understand, it's easier to fly by night than your Sukhoi 7 is. So there is no need for two dual checks in this. Besides, the other air forces operating Jaguars are quite happy doing just one trainer sortie. But I have to regrettably report that I lost the battle. They said नहीं, टू में तो सेवन दो करते हैं, यहाँ भी दो करो, ये तो और महंगा जहाज है, don't take chances with whatever. So I lost the battle. I sincerely hope subsequently it was corrected, but mm, uh, at that time I had lost the battle. So I'm just saying that when a new system arrives, um we sometimes tend to equate it with the antiquated system that we have in our inventory. Uh, in fact, so my emphasis in this talk is to say that the purchase of Jaguar. Now you can laugh at it's an underpowered aircraft. It does this and it, but it changed so many things because the capabilities. The reason is that you could go and strike deep into the enemy territory. In fact, if you will allow me, one of the slogans put up in 14th Squadron crew room was Jaguar pilots strike deeper and deliver a bigger load. So, you know, the ability to go far and strike in all kinds of weather, daylight, night conditions, and to deliver the weapons reasonably accurately is what the Jaguar aircraft gave us. And I'll tell you what, the technology, of course, has moved enormously since then. But 40 years ago, 4 decades back, it was a sea change in the capabilities of the IF. Uh, Also, please understand that just the fact that we could strike deep into the enemy territory, they had to then worry about air defenses of the
Right,
deeper
right.
targets. Suddenly, suddenly, they say, oh, three squadrons of missiles are not good enough now. I need eight, 10, or whatever, because these guys can go and hit anywhere, right? So I am just saying that the challenges it posed to the enemy by just having the Jaguars in our inventory is enough. I would like to also say that the Jaguars used to operate because they did a fair amount of low flying, and after I think 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, no low flying was permitted because of the bird menace. There was a particular area. It was called the ELTA, and the it was some tactical area, low flying tactical area. I forget the full name, but ELTA was largely the Rajasthan desert. So there, after the green period, as it was known, the morning hours were bird free periods. We used to fly from Ambala, climb up, get into the Rajasthan desert sector, and then descend and carry out low level work. Okay. And then, whilst returning back to Ambala, we would climb up again and then descend over Ambala and land. So, um, how to avoid the birds in the Punjab sector, which was full of birds, and how to go into a relatively bird free area, uh, only we had the range to do it. So we could practice and it was essentially designed for low level work. It I think it changed our thought process. May I also say, while it's on night flying and night strike capability, 14th Squadron turned out to be the first squadron with which completed the night strike syllabus. So we wrote the syllabus and we got the syllabus approved, and then we focused. At one time, I remember uh, in 14th Squadron, we did stop doing all day flying and we only
Oh,
operated at
wow.
night, so that quickly the whole squadron could become operational by night. There was a separate syllabus for nights it was called the night strike syllabus, and we just stopped flying by the day, and we said we should be ready to go to war and win it. Not only ready to go to war and win it, both by day and by night. And therefore, I recall the entire system. Uh, Remember, if we want to fly in Ambala, Halwara, Chandigarh, and Adampur have to stand by. The radars have to churn in various other places. Um, and therefore people were not hopefully happy with our idea of wanting to fly by night all through the night, but that's what we did, and very quickly this squadron became uh, night strike
Right, right.
qualified.
Visual to Jaguar on target before repatriation. Just 70, Roger, report type southeast, connection for advise and yield selected.
Now, sir, this low level at night, really the risk of spatial disorientation and things like that were quite serious in the Jaguar, isn't it?
Yeah, it would. Yeah, correct. There is a risk, and we did lose a gentleman called Gajraj Singh who got disoriented. There was a young flying officer, Mishra, I think his name was. We lost him at night, but that was at medium level. The Mishra ji, he got disoriented. There was a gentleman called Pete Wilson who was my station commander in Jamnagar when I was a young flight lieutenant with the PI school. He used to say there are only two kinds of pilots: those who have got disoriented and those who will get disoriented.
Right.
So, this is the challenge of aviation. But the chances of disorientation because of the head up display, etc., and therefore lesser head movement, etc., were to my mind, there were less chances in the Jaguar than they were in some of the other aircraft I've flown. It was I believe still is a fairly decent platform for night
Right. But it's
strike.
just that, if you get disoriented at 500 feet, the risks are much greater than if you do it at.
Yes, at low level, you will have much lesser chance of recovery. We understand that. We understand that. So, look, whoever said flying is without risks, fighter flying certainly is not. It's not risk free. No flying is risk free, but certainly combat flying and fighter flying is not risk free. There are some elements of risk. What has happened is, as we have moved along, remember, I am talking of a technology that existed half a century ago. But today we are far better, in terms of technology of aids. We have monitoring systems. If you get down below a certain height, the aircraft will pull up itself. There are terrain avoidance systems available. So the chances of accidents occurring are less today. That means there is no zero accident possible, but the chances are less. The aircraft are safer. The environment is safer. So I would believe that it was a major step towards achieving the kind of shall I say the strength that we have by night today. Today we can of course operate by day and night, and just see how the IAF went and hit Balakot. That's a living example of we can strike by any time of the day or night. I would say that we are discussing an aeroplane, Ganesh, which is which was inducted in 1979. When I visited 14 Squadron recently, the guy said, "When did you bring the Jaguar in, sir?" So I said, 1979. He said, "No,
Oh,
I was not born then." He was commanding the Jaguar Squadron,
he's
14
not
Squadron in
born.
Ambala. He said, "No, no, I was born
Uh,
after that." So it was long, long back.
right.
Yeah.
Great. And So you were a small fleet, but I think you were used fairly extensively throughout the Air Force. And, you know, uh, do you have examples of where you came in during, say, an exercise and did things that the Air Force had never seen before, never been prepared for before, because you came in so stealthily, so low, so fast?
But I one of the lessons, and if it sounds like a little boast, then do pardon me. One of the lessons learned is we did follow when we inducted the MiG 29, the then powers that we decided that particular 47 squadron will convert. And they said, yeah, if X can fly it, Y can fly it, right? What difference does it make? X can service it, then Y can service it. But what had happened was for the Mirage fleets and the Jaguar fleets, what we had done is we had selected the ground crew, the technical officers, the pilots. They were handpicked. Now, I did say, since I was part of the system, uh, it sounds like an idle boast, but I have to say that it is important that the initial lot are some of your best. Now, they need not be super champions, but they have to be some of your best. And the reason for that is they then come and start the process of exploiting the new weapon system. And we need those who have an inclination towards developing things. So I have to say that, for example, the Jaguar aircraft were fitted with magic missiles, over wing air defense missiles. uh, Now, a lot of people said, "Isco, who will use it? This bloody aircraft has a difficulty taking off with full load on a hot day, etc., etc." But I have to say that we sat down in the squadron. Now, normally TACD does the development of tactics, but since they did not operate Jaguars and we were the pioneers, remember it was left to people like Charlie Brown, Tiny Kumaria, Sunil Lord, and others to sit down and then work out what we used to in those days call the 4 versus 2 tactics, but basically how to exploit the fact that we have magic missiles with us. No, don't worry if the aircraft is under part, this, that. But if we go in numbers, if we have 10, 12 aircraft strikes, so we also did this broad frontage flying. We did this, what we call long trails. So it is 10 aircraft in trails, some doing escort, some doing EW work, and some doing air defense work. So I mean, I'm just saying that there was an enormous change, I believe, that the Jaguar fleet brought about in changing the way we thought, the way we planned operations. I have to also simultaneously admit that those who followed us in other fleets, like the Mirage fleet, for example, did an enormously great job, and they contributed immensely to this. But I am just focusing on, because the Jaguar was the first aircraft with the kind of avionics it did have at that time, that lot of things changed because of our induction. And I will go back, Gani, to the fact that it helped that we had flown the full syllabus with the RAF, because
Right,
that
right.
exposure. Remember that in those days we were not exercising so much with the other air forces. Today we learn a lot by interacting with others, but in those days, since we had limitation, it's like actually interacting with another air force. So we spent 6 months with the Royal Air Force and learnt an enormous lot. We also taught an enormous lot, because I will tell you, in air defense matters, which is what we were experts at, having flown the MiG 21. Um, we knew far more than those Jaguar pilots we met. But I have to say that in the strike role, we were behind, and there for induction of the aircraft and our exposure to the RAF flying and their approach towards operational work did enormous good to us when we got back.
Got it, got it.
Visual to before evacuate. Just need 70, like your report type southeast, connect for evacuate and you will select this.
So I've taken so much of your time, but there's one incident that I want to ask you about, which is, I interviewed Nachiketa at the beginning of season two. You were ACS intelligence, and I saw when you received him at Wagah, you were there. So, yeah, just give us some sense of what was going on behind the scenes after.
Okay, three things that I want to say. I was ACS intelligence during the Kargil War. Now, this discussion of ours is not Kargil based, so I will not go into those details. But I was also the representative of air headquarters in the army headquarters. So I attended all the briefings of the DGMO and DGMI and whichever the chief of army staff chaired. Uh, because I was the chief of air staff's intelligence officer and the DGMI who was the intelligence officer of the army chief. He always accompanied the army chief. So I like a two-star is actually in this game not this big, but the chief of the Indian Air Force also said, hey, if you are bringing your intelligence officer, I'll bring mine. And that's how I landed up initially into the meetings chaired by the CCS, by the Prime Minister, etc. And subsequently, I was detailed as two things to liaison from air headquarters to the army headquarters, and also we thought when the Kargil War started that it might escalate and become a full-fledged Indo-Pak war. For the first time, the armed forces were brought into the loop of the nuclear game, and myself and uh, Arun Tiwari, he was die-cast at that time, now late. Uh, the two of us were detailed, and we were sworn to secrecy. And I will tell you this story
Sure,
privately some
sure.
other day. But we were the only two virtually in the entire Bharti Vayu who had some idea
Right.
at that time. I mean, before that, Krishna Swami had taken part in some trials, but some other day,
Sure.
this story. But what I'm trying to get at is, since I was the ACS intelligence, uh, two things I want to mention. One is the phone rang in my office during the Kargil War, and there was a guy, Jaswant Singh. He was the Minister of External Affairs in those days. His son, Madhvendra, or Manuvender Singh. Uh, his uncles were my classmates in Rajasthan. We spoke Rajasthani. He was at that time the defense correspondent of Indian Express. He was also the son of the Minister of External Affairs, Shri Jaswant Singh ji. He called me up in my office and said, "Sir, have we lost a helicopter in Kargil?" And I said, "No, not that I know of." So he said, "BBC is reporting India has lost a helicopter." So I charged to the ACS officer's office, that was late Teju Asthana, and I said, "Have we lost a helicopter?" He said, "No. What makes you think that?" So I said, "Well, I've just heard BBC is reporting." Well, in those days, we didn't have these TV cameras in the offices. Now they do. But this was also the first war where we had taken correspondence. Barkha Dutts and various other people had gone and interviewed all sorts of people in Kargil. They were sitting in Kargil, care of our land forces. Why is BBC reporting? So we rang up Western Air Command. And Western Air Command said, "No, you lost nothing." Now, please understand, Gani, when two helicopters get airborne from Srinagar, they will maintain radio silence in a
Right.
strike road. When they hit the target in Kargil, And if they get hit, nobody will break the radio
Hmm.
silence. The guy who is hit might break it, declare an emergency or yell, I'm dying, I'm crashing, whatever. But the others will keep quiet because that is the briefing done
Right,
to them.
right.
But the media was all over in Kargil. They were actually watching from the visibility is very good up in the hills. So the British, well, BBC correspondent actually saw the missile hit the helicopter, the
Right.
Mi 17. He had in those days, remember, the telecommunications, this cell phone business was not so hot 25 years ago. Um, well, what happened was that he had a what do you call it, satellite telephone with him,
Right, right. Uh-huh.
and he immediately transmitted on the satellite telephone to his bosses in London, and immediately it was put on the sticker, your ticker tape. Sorry, Hmm. that in IF loses one helicopter. Now remember that the other helicopter which had not been hit, this helicopter of course went down and everybody got killed. He will not break radio silence. He will quietly turn around and he'll go back to Srinagar. When he lands, after he lands, he will tell his CEO, sir, we have lost. So who all were the crew? The CEO might check before he informs the AOC, who will then get some information. Kitne log the, kaun tha, what were the names, etc., etc. Before he informs the Western Air Command. So there is a small time lag, say 30 minutes to 40 minutes, something like that, depending on the exercise. But this is not a problem of the media, right? He just picked up his phone and said, "Hey, one aircraft gone," and there you were. BBC was reporting, and sure enough, we learned much later, Ganesh, when I was the AOCNC Western Air Command. I once got home around 2:15, 2:30, or something like that in the afternoon, and I was just waiting for the lunch to be laid on the table when I switched on, and there were one or two news channels in those days. There were very few. So I switched on Aaj Tak, and on the ticker tape, I read, uh, Ambala में एक Jaguar aircraft गिरा. We have lost one aircraft in Ambala. This is all it said on the ticker tape. Now I said, I don't know. I'm the AOC of this command. So I picked up the phone and I rang up Sasso, who was Air Marshal Bhojwani in those days. And I said, Bhoji, have we lost a Jaguar in Ambala? He said, no, sir. So I said, but I'll just check. So he called up the flight safety officer who said, no, sir. And then we called up Ambala. By then, remember the communication systems had improved, the cell phones had come in. Now, this is the thing. The Jaguar aircraft was actually lost over Ambala, but we have what is known as a pre-accident plan in the base, where who all are to be informed, how quickly, and the focus is on
Recover
trying
the
to recover
pilot,
the
right.
pilot. Yeah, get the ambulance going, call the doctor, activate the military hospital, etc., etc. And the crash tenders must move, the fire tenders must move, the ambulances must move. The last thing you want to do is please inform the AOCC. Who cares? Okay, at that time. That is not part of the pre-accident plan. So what has happened is this Jaguar aircraft, and I can't remember the details, was lost immediately after takeoff. Now, just outside Ambala, if you recall your younger days, is the highway, the Chandigarh highway runs. Correct. Now, this pilot ejected and fell very close to the highway. But since the I mean, sorry, the accident took place immediately after takeoff. The crash site was very close to where the pilot landed. Okay, because it was a low-level ejection. Now, what has happened is on the highway there are always some vehicles, some motorcycles, some cars, some buses, some trucks, always moving. 24 hours. Somebody has, remember, they are called what? Citizen journalists or whatever. Was one guy took out his cell phone and rang up Aaj Tak. Hey, I'm on the Ambala Chandigarh highway, and very close to me, one aircraft has crashed. They put it on their ticker tape. So by the time I actually officially learned, because when we remember because the cell phones had come and we could raise the AOC Ambala very quickly. And he said, "Yeah, I've lost that Jaguar, but that get off my back. I have to recover the
Right.
passengers." Okay. He doesn't want to answer questions at that time. You know? His focus is somewhere else. But I only brought these two issues of both the Kargil and the and uh, this Jaguar loss, because now the new challenge of the commanders is everybody is reporting, information travels so quickly. So you must understand that in a state, it is the chief minister who's asked the question. Earlier we used to ask the local collector, the local commissioner, क्या हुआ आपके district में. Now they expect the leader to know everything, and this is the kind of challenge the modern day
Correct.
leaders will
Nowadays,
face.
there's an accident and you
Okay.
see videos on
Mm.
Twitter before anything else.
Yeah, you will find somebody here, because the accident doesn't always takes place on the airfield. It may take place outside, and immediately somebody will film, and it will be on the Facebook and the Twitter and God knows on all sorts of social media. So back to Nachiketa. During this period, Nachiketa, if you remember, was the only guy who was a POW. Now, this is strange to call it a POW itself, the term, because we were not at war. Here was Pakistan, which was saying, "No, हम तो हैं ही नहीं उधर. We are not there. I don't know who you are fighting. They won't accept their dead." You know, this was a peculiar war because it was an unseen enemy. And whilst the Indian Air Force was operating, remember the Pakistan Air Force stayed away because once they have said, "We are not there, you can't use your Air Force." The other thing was that we had decided we will not cross the LOC.
LOC, right.
Yeah. So, due to some very relevant reasons, the government had taken a decision we will not cross the LOC. And the reason was because they had crossed the LOC and occupied the heights in Kargil and the Dras sector. Uh, we had said they have violated the sanctity of LOC. So whatever we will do, we will not violate the sanctity of the LOC. LOC is there is a sanctity of this line. This was decided in 1971 when we changed it from the ceasefire line to the line of control. Uh, well, well, in spite of not crossing the LOC, because we were in close quarters to each other, when Nachiketa, and I won't go into why he ejected, but he lost an engine and uh, firing the S-24s, and he ejected, and because of the wind conditions, although the aircraft was not to cross the LOC, the wind conditions will take the parachute in all sorts of directions, and he landed up in the Pakistani side. I say Pakistani because they were, of course, saying, "Hum to hai hi nahi idhar. We are not
Correct,
here."
correct.
Uh,
Technically, it was on our side of the LOC, but they were in control of that region.
yeah, correct. So technically, it was on our side of the LOC. May have been on our side of the LOC, but the troops were Pakistanis who, I think Nachiketa when he landed there, I so he said when we were debriefing him. But quickly, let me change the topic. Why ACS gets involved is that any person who has been in captivity of the enemy has to be debriefed, and you have to convince yourself that he has not been converted. There is no Stockholm syndrome. He has not been bought, and he's not switched to the other side, etc., etc. So this is the world over. It's not the Indian Air Force. The world over. This he needs to be debriefed before he meets other people. That's how I got into the act. So well, he landed on the Pakistani side, and I think he said his first thoughts were to be a hero because he was carrying a six shooter with him. In war, air crew do carry some weapons. and he then I think better senses prevailed. With 6 bullets you can't really fight the Pakistan army. So he hid behind a rock, and the Pakistani soldiers had seen him coming down. They came, they captured him. Now remember, when the Pakistani soldiers, and I forget now what soldiers they were they Baluchis, Pathans, or Punjabis, but they were not Punjabis, they were whoever they were. They caught hold of him, and then they radioed to their officer that, we have an Indian Air Force pilot in captivity. When remember, in the mountains it will take some time before people climb up to these hillocks. Nothing happens very quickly in the mountains. So there is no jeepable road or whatever. You have to climb up the mountain. So what they were doing is they were guarding Nachiketa, and then they decided to have their meal. And they asked Nachiketa, "Kuch khayega?" And Nachiketa quickly, I think, remembered that he didn't know when his next meal will come from. So he said, "Ha ha, khaunga." And they offered him dal, gosht, and roti. Okay, so it's dal and meat mixed along with the roti. You must understand, Gani, that this vegetarianism is an upper caste Hindu concept. It doesn't really exist outside India, and certainly not in Pakistan. So most people don't know what is vegetarianism, and if you go to a Pakistani restaurant, and I've lived in the Middle East, and I have often eaten there, and you ask them, "Kya khilayenge aap?" They'll say dal gosht, aloo gosht, bindi gosht, gajar gosht, something else. You must understand that there is always the gosht is a part of the meal. There is no such thing as a vegetarian dish. So what happened was, when they offered him dal gosht, uh, he looked at it and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, ये मैं नहीं खाता हूँ, मैं तो vegetarian." Now they had never heard this term vegetarian, the Pakistani troops. So he said, "ये क्या होता है vegetarian?" And Nachiketa said, this much Hindi he knew. He said, "मैं गोश्त नहीं खाता." And the Pakistanis, in total surprise, looked at him and said, "फिर तू पाकिस्तान क्या करने आया है?" And, they were amazed. They were, how can you have a guy who doesn't eat meat? And what is he doing in Pakistan then? Uh, but they caught him, they took him. The rest of the story is known in the sense that the Pakistanis took charge. He was debriefed by the Pakistani intelligence, and by then, remember, this was a war when the media was fully into the loop. So people ran with television cameras and interviewed his parents, his brother, his sister, or his neighbors, all sorts of people. So, and then the newspapers like Hindustan Times, Times of India, Indian Express, etc., had written huge, printed photographs of his family. The sister is waiting, the father is waiting, the mother is waiting, all that sort of thing. And this is what the neighbor said, and his address and his papa's phone number, everything was common knowledge here. What happened was, Nachiketa, when he landed up in Pakistan, they said, "तेरा बाप का नाम ये है ना, तेरी माँ का नाम ये है ना,
My God.
तू तो वहां रहता है." But it was all common knowledge, but except that he didn't know, right? That the Indian media was broadcasting all this. So he had been taken down into the plains at debriefing at different levels. And because I remember when I met him, he said, "Sir, उनका तो intelligence बहुत hot है." I said, "क्यों?" He said, "No, they knew everything about me." I said, "You idiot, the whole of India knows everything about you." So, anybody who reads the newspaper knows everything about you. So, what I'm trying to say, very smartly, they had used this knowledge to scare him But a flight lieutenant in a squadron, he knew only very, very limited amount. So if he parted any information, it couldn't have been any worthwhile information. I don't know what he did, but it is sufficient. Suffice it to say that his inputs were very limited. Okay. Um, well, as you now recall, just like much later, Mr. Imran Khan said, "I will return the Indian pilot." Um, this pilot was returned to us because I told you I was ACS intelligence, and I had later Air Marshal Randhawa at that time, Group Captain Randhawa. He was Joint Director Counterintelligence. Now he and I went to Amritsar to receive Nachiketa because we had to debrief him. Before he met anybody else, we had to talk to him and convince ourselves that he's the same Nachiketa that went to Pakistan and not an altered Nachiketa.
Ah, right. Okay.
So when we land up in on the Wagah border, we landed in Amritsar in a Dornier, I think, and we drove down to the Wagah border. Now, Gani, you know this. Oh man, as it is, hundreds of people go to watch the changing of the guards at Wagah border. There were thousands of people,
My
thousands,
God.
which are
The news had already
all
got out that he's coming there, is
Nachiketa.
it?
Huh? When the air was full of Bharat Mata Ki Jai, Vande Mataram, and the rest of it. There were tricolors flying all over, and the scene was it was like the Melbourne Cricket Stadium or the Eden Gardens full when India's playing.
My God.
The atmosphere was unbelievable. Also, the entire world's media seemed to have got there. The BBC, the Americans, the CNN, and all the Indian media also. Um, all sorts of news channels were there with their cameras to receive Shri Nachiketa. He was the lone POW, lone Indian caught. Uh, what happened was that the BSF, it looks after the Wagah border. They took me and Randhawa inside to, shall we call it, the like the VIP room. And we
Right.
found that they were cabinet ministers from Punjab, etc. Some representatives of the governor Punjab and all. They had come with flowers and garlands and whatever to receive. So I said, "It's very, very nice of you. Thank you very much." I was introduced to them, but I said, "You will not meet Nachiketa. I have to debrief him." I didn't use the word debrief. I said, "No, we have some processes, procedures. You will not be able to meet him, not saying hello to anyone. Uh, I'll tell you what, we have bought a car along. We'll put your flowers in that and we'll pass them on to Nachiketa." They were most disappointed. They said, "We are ministers. Why can't we meet him?" So I said that there is a process. And I was very firm that he had to first be debriefed, then meet others. All I know is that there's a barrier there. The BSF guards our side, and there are these huge, tall Pathans in those Peshawari sandals who guard the other side. And Nachiketa, right, along with our air attache, etc., uh, on the other side, meaning the Pakistani side of the border. Now remember, he had not gone to Pakistan with um, passport, visa, and such like things. So there is some paper action required to be done because he is being handed over to the Indian authorities, although he has no papers. Now civilian clothes were provided by our High Commission to him. He was wearing some shirt and pant. And anyway, to cut a long story short, I was standing on our side of the, shall I say, the border. There is a bar which is lifted up, right? He was on the other side, and I had told the BSF, I had briefed them, nobody will come close to us, etc., etc. With the BSF was trying their darndest, but there were thousands of people pushing us. Now, all I remember now is that when Nachiketa walked in and the barrier went up so that he could walk into the Indian side, hundreds and thousands of people pushed us from behind.
Wow.
They all
My
wanted to
goodness.
touch him. Okay.
Hmm.
And I found myself in the feet of a huge Pathan wearing Peshawari sandals. I had been pushed into Pakistan without a visa and passport. And I said, "What the hell is happening?" So I got out the BSF, and then the Pathans helped me. And then we crossed back into India. But there was commotion. The cameras were there, but the people were just wanted to touch him, right? No, I yelled at the BSF guys, "What the hell is happening here?" There was a two-star Air Force officer lying on the feet of a Pathan soldier. I was pulled back. Then they cleared the way. It took us forever from that barrier to the car park some distance away. Because we had to negotiate the crowd, and Bharat Mata ki Jai was going on, and the cameras were a lot of people were throwing questions at him. I whispered in his ear, I said, "You are not to open your mouth. Okay, you keep quiet.
Right.
You are not supposed to answer questions. First, you answer my questions. I'll be asking questions." Uh, well, long and short, again, I we got into the car, but the car couldn't move forward because it was surrounded by people, cameras, media, all sorts of BSF were trying to clear the path. And then uh, what happened was a young girl, and she must be in her early 20s or something, she said, "Uncle," I was sitting in the car with Nachiketa in the rear seat, and Randava was occupying the front seat with the MTD. Uh, he said, "Uncle, I am Rasika's friend." So you will remember Ganesh, Rasika is my daughter.
Yes, of
So,
course. Yeah.
and,
My
and
goodness.
Rasika was working for, I think, NDTV in those, no, not NDTV.
Uh-huh.
He was
Right.
working for one of the news channels in those
One of
days.
the news channels.
Uh,
Okay.
so um, she said, "Uncle, I'm Rasika's friend." I said, "What can I do for you?" She gave me a cassette, okay, or a film roll. I forget now what it was. And she said, "Uncle, will you take this to Delhi and give it to my friend in Delhi?" I said, "Who's your friend?" He said, "Don't worry. My friend will get in touch with you. As soon as you land in Delhi, he'll be in Palam. There's a lot of media waiting for you in Palam, and he will come. It is his responsibility to collect it from you. You have to do nothing." So I said, "Hey, thank you. You look after yourself, young lady." And I took that cassette with me. About a minute or two later, remember, we hadn't moved very much forward because of the crowd. One Sardar Saab came. He was around my age, I guess. Um, he knocked on that window pane, and I put the window pane on. "Yes, what can I do for you?" He said, "Yeah, yeah, मेरा भी cassette ले जाओ एक." So I got a little annoyed, and I said, "Hey, listen here. I'll be damned. I'm not a courier service here. You find your way of sending your own cassette." And he told me something which I will always remember. He said, "क्यों कुड़ी का तो ले लिया?" Which means you touched the young
Took the
girl's one.
girls.
So I said, "अच्छा दे दीजिए." So I took his also. And put, अच्छा अच्छा और किसी को मत आने देना please. Then we got into the car, cleared the the border area, and then of course we hit the highway, which was clean. And then we got an opportunity, Randhawa and I, and we had to tape his whatever he had to say. So we taped it. We asked him, I've already shared with you what he thought of the intelligence and why. Mm, how he said Pakistan intelligence knew everything about him, and we quickly corrected his impression. But he had been there for a very short while, and he had been treated reasonably. I mean, There is a small hot and cold treatment, but he was treated okay. Uh, he was not exactly a Bharati there, right? So when war is on, but within those constraints, okay. Uh, so we took him, and since he was kind of a national hero, when we landed in Delhi, we had been told that he will meet the president, vice president, prime minister, defense minister. He has to call on them.
My goodness.
So
Mhm.
he had to fly his uniform from Adampur, where his squadron was based at that time, into Delhi. Because if he's got to visit the Rashtrapati, he can't do it in the shirt and trousers that he's wearing, So he's an Air Force officer. His uniform, etc., was flown from Adampur to Delhi to prepare for the next day's meeting with all the VVIPs. When we landed in Delhi, the chief of air staff and the Raksha Mantri were there to receive him, and there was enormous amount of media there. So we, in this game, somewhere he had changed from his civilian clothing to. Oh, sorry. In this game, somewhere he had changed from his civilian clothing into uniform. Uh, And when he got down wearing a uniform, as we were all wearing at that time. But except that he was wearing a peak cap, whilst we were all wearing a side cap. Okay. Now, when he landed, now remember he was to call on the big shots the next day. It was 7:38 in the evening at that time. Uh, the pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I don't like this boy's cap. This is a very not in a good shape. Get him a new cap. He's got to meet the president, the vice president, etc. So get him a new cap." I said, "Bloody 8 o'clock at night. Who from Parliament? How do I get him a cap of his size, etc.? It was challenging because all shops, the tailor shops, etc., who sell P caps are all shut down. Where will I find one?" Um, and then I did what all smart IAF officers do. I picked up the phone and rang up Western Air Command because this couldn't belong to WAC. I said, "The chief wants a new PCAP for Nachiketa," and banged the phone down. I don't know what happened, but he had a new cap the next morning.
Right.
So that is largely Nachiketa, unless you have some other queries.
No, no, not at all. I just wanted to see what happened on this side. This is great. But this has been a fascinating conversation, sir. I've taken maybe 3 hours, 3.5 hours of your time. I want to thank you for your service, and I also want to thank you for all the time. So much detail.
Thank you, Gans. Thank you very much. You will have to do an enormous amount of editing because these are random thoughts, and at the age of 78, man, and the thought process is not as clear as it used to be.
No, sir, my audience loves this, what you call rambling, but they just enjoy that level of detail. So thank you so much for doing it.
Visual before evacuation. Just need 70, Roger, report IP southeast, connection, before evacuation, and you will select this.
Well, folks, that's all we have time for this week. Join us again next week. In the meantime, sign up for updates at blueskiespodcast.com. There you'll find links to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can also write to us with your comments, questions, suggestions, and feedback from the website or to blueskies@prganapati.com. Subscribe to the podcast on any podcasting platform such as Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and even on YouTube. If you like what you heard, share it with your friends, give us a rating in your favorite podcasting app, and write us a review. It will help other people find us. I want to give my thanks to Saurav Chordia for our logo and Prithvik for the music. I want to reiterate that all the views expressed here are personal, and this podcast has not been approved by or reviewed by the Air Force, Ministry of Defense, or any branch of the government. In the meantime, stay safe and Jai Hind.